the wilderness has always held a strange kind of beauty. Cool winds drifting through the trees, birds calling in the distance, and sunlight breaking gently across the forest floor. Yet behind this calm surface lies another face, one far more unsettling. The wild is not just a place of peace and wonder. It is also a place where trails vanish, compasses fail, and people can step forward only to never be seen again. These stories are not merely legends, but a blend of chilling accounts and folklore that linger in the shadows of forgotten paths. For those who walk these trails, some return with memories they can't explain, while others never return at all. The forest holds both welcome and warning, beauty and danger. And so the question remains, when the trail disappears and the wilderness closes in around you, where do you go? The forgotten path it began like so many mornings in the backcountry do, calm, bright, and almost reassuring. A lone hiker set out before sunrise, boots laced, backpack snug, the kind of morning where dew still clung to blades of grass and the trail stretched clear and open ahead. He carried with him a thermos of coffee, a folded map, and the unshakable belief that he knew exactly where he was going. Birds sang their scattered melodies above, while the crunch of gravel underfoot became a rhythm, steady and grounding. Everything about those first steps was ordinary, familiar, and safe, but wilderness has a way of reshaping itself. What starts as comfort can twist into something far less certain. As the hours passed, the hiker noticed how the bright blue markers nailed to tree trunks began to thin out, until the last one he spotted seemed almost faded, as though it had been left behind years ago. He stopped, adjusted his pack, and reassured himself it was nothing. Maybe the trail crew hadn't maintained this stretch in a while. He pressed forward. The forest grew quieter. The cheerful songs of birds that had accompanied him in the morning seemed to fall away, replaced by the kind of silence that presses against the ears. Even the wind slowed, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. He muttered to himself, a small sound to cut through the stillness, but each word felt swallowed before it could reach the air. That's when he realized something unsettling. His footsteps no longer echoed as they had on gravel earlier. The path beneath him had softened, narrowed, almost imperceptibly, until it was less a trail and more a faint disturbance in the ground. And yet, he continued, convincing himself that the real trail would appear again just ahead. That's what trails always do, don't they? But instead of reassurance, what came next was the strange sensation of being observed. Not the casual awareness of other hikers nearby, but the primal feeling of eyes lingering on him from the trees. He stopped and turned. Nothing. The woods were empty. He forced a laugh, half-hearted and uneasy, before tightening the straps on his backpack and pushing forward again. Later, search teams would say he must have left the marked trail. They would point out that disorientation happens quickly in dense forest, that people often believe they're moving in a straight line when in fact they're circling. They would mark it down as a tragic accident, another hiker unprepared for the shifting moods of the wild. But then there were his final words. According to a note found in his pocket, scrawled in hurried handwriting, the last thing he wrote was short, almost childlike in its simplicity. The trail ended, but the trees want me to keep walking. Nobody was ever recovered. Only his pack, propped neatly against a tree, as if placed there by careful hands. No footprints leading away, no broken branches, just silence, and the memory of a hiker who walked into the forest and never returned. And so the question lingers. Was it misdirection? A cruel trick of the mind? Or something much darker waiting beyond the last visible marker? Echoes in the mountains. Unlike the solitary hiker before, this story begins with laughter. A group of 4 friends, college classmates reunited after years apart, set out on a late summer weekend to conquer a mountain trail famous for its views. The trail wound high into the ridges, sharp switchbacks giving way to open vistas where they could look down on valleys painted in green and gold. Spirits were high, jokes bounced back and forth, and the sound of boots on dirt was accompanied by bursts of carefree conversation. It felt safe, safer perhaps than hiking alone. Together they moved as one, sharing snacks, taking photos, teasing the one who lagged behind. They pitched their tents near the tree line just as the sky burned orange with the setting sun. Around the fire, the warmth of friendship wrapped around them as tightly as the smoke curling into the night air. But as darkness settled, the mountain changed. The first sound came when they were still telling stories, an echo. At first, it seemed like their own voices bouncing back from the ridges. They laughed about it, exaggerating words to hear them repeated. But soon the echoes didn't quite line up. A word spoken by one of them returned slower, stretched, like someone else was repeating it on delay. A name called out came back deeper, cracked, almost unrecognizable. The joking faded. They sat in silence, listening. Then came the shuffle of movement just beyond the circle of firelight. When they aimed their flashlights, nothing was there. Trees, rocks, darkness. But the moment the beams swung away, the sound returned, feet crunching softly as if circling them. One friend, the boldest, decided to call out into the night, "Who's there?" The answer was his own voice. That was when unease turned to fear. By morning, the group was exhausted. They packed quickly, eager to descend back toward safety. But sometime during the hurried process, they noticed one tent still zipped shut. Inside lay only a sleeping bag, half unrolled, and the missing friend's backpack. His shoes were gone, his jacket too. But not a single track led away from the site. Panic set in. They searched the tree line, shouting his name. But each call came back in that warped echo, the sound of his name repeated again and again, bouncing from the ridges as though the mountain itself were mocking them. Then the weather shifted. Clouds swept in fast, swallowing the sunlight. The air grew cold, a kind of sudden chill that bites straight through layers of clothing. Within minutes, fog rolled down the slope, thick enough that they could barely see each other. The search ended not by choice, but by force. The mountain pushed them back, blinding them with mist, driving them down the trail. When rangers investigated later, no trace of the missing hiker was ever found. His belongings remained undisturbed, as if waiting. The echoes, locals said, were not unusual. People often heard their names in the mountains, especially at night. Some claimed it was just the way sound carried. Others whispered it was something older, something alive, that repeated names until it found one worth keeping. And in that silence, after the echoes fade, the mountain always feels emptier by one soul. The vanishing camperit was supposed to be the safest part of the trip. After miles of hiking, the traveler found a quiet clearing, pitched his small tent, and built a modest fire. In his journal, later recovered from the site, he wrote about how peaceful it felt, the way the flames flickered against the darkness, the way the forest seemed still and calm under the stars. There was no fear in his words, no hint that anything was wrong, only the simple notes of a man who had found solitude in the wild. He described warming his hands over the fire, sipping from a battered tin cup, and writing by the faint glow of his headlamp. His last entry ended mid-sentence, as though interrupted by something trivial, a yawn perhaps, or the decision to crawl into his sleeping bag for the night. Nothing suggested alarm. Nothing suggested he would become another unsolved mystery. When rangers discovered the campsite days later, the scene appeared untouched. The fire had long since gone cold, leaving behind only a circle of grey ash. The tent still stood, its zipper pulled shut from the inside. His backpack leaned against a tree, supplies carefully packed, as though waiting for the morning's hike. But the camper himself was gone, There were no footprints leading away, no drag marks in the dirt. Even the leaves around the site seemed undisturbed. Search teams combed the surrounding forest for miles, bringing in dogs, helicopters, and volunteers. Nothing. The man had simply vanished, leaving behind the shell of his presence, his belongings, his notes, his little circle of order in the chaos of the woods, investigators speculated. Some suggested he wandered off sleepwalking, though the closed zipper argued otherwise. Others wondered if he staged his disappearance, though friends insisted he had no reason to run. A few whispered about predators, but again, no tracks, no signs of struggle. Just absence. What unsettled many most was that zipper. To find the tent closed from within implied he had been there, inside, when whatever happened occurred. How does someone leave a space without leaving it? How do they step away without making a single mark? The journal, with its half-finished line, felt almost like a taunt. A voice frozen in time, cut short before the forest swallowed it whole. The final words were ordinary, harmless, but that abrupt ending carried more weight than anything else, unfinished, unanswered. To this day, hikers passing through that region sometimes stop at the same clearing. They say it feels unnaturally still, as though the woods themselves are holding their breath. Some leave quickly, unsettled by a silence that presses too close. Others linger, staring at the ground, wondering if the earth beneath their feet remembers what happened that night. Did the camper walk away, or was he taken without ever leaving at all? Patterns of the lost step. Far enough back from individual stories, and unsettling patterns begin to emerge. Wilderness disappearances may seem random when taken one at a time, but laid side by side, they echo one another with unnerving similarity. One common detail, reported again and again, is sudden weather. A clear day turns to fog, a bright morning swallowed by storms, cutting visibility and direction in moments. Search teams often remark how these shifts seem almost timed, arriving just as someone strays from the trail or lingers too long in the wrong place. Then there are the shoes. In dozens of cases, hikers' boots are found far from where their bodies, if ever discovered, turn up. Sometimes they're arranged neatly, as though placed with intention. Other times they're miles away, impossible to reconcile with rugged terrain. Why would someone remove footwear in landscapes where protection is survival? Time of day offers no protection either. Many vanish in broad daylight, steps away from companions who only looked away for a moment. A child trailing just behind parents, an adult pausing to tie a shoelace, gone in the span of seconds. No sound, no sign. Just absence where there had been presence. And when bodies are found, the placement is often confounding. Some lie in areas already searched multiple times, suddenly appearing where rescuers swore nothing was before. Others are discovered at elevations or distances deemed impossible for a lost hiker to reach unaided. Folklore clings to these patterns, weaving them into tales of spirits, watchers, or forces older than the trails themselves. Skeptics argue fatigue, hypothermia, and confusion account for the strangest details. But even science struggles to explain why so many vanish under such similar circumstances, circumstances that repeat across continents, across generation. These patterns are more than coincidences. They are threads, connecting countless missing across time and geography. And as we move forward, the next stories take us deeper. Onto trails spoken of in whispers, paths said to shift and hunt. Places where those patterns are not anomalies, but expectations. The trail that hunts. Every town bordering wilderness has its stories, legends meant to warn travelers, to keep children close to campfires, to explain the inexplicable. But in one mountain valley, the legend is not about bears, storms, or falling rocks. It's about a trail that doesn't stay where it should. Locals call it the trail that hunts you. At first glance, it looks like any other path, packed dirt weaving between pines, sunlight filtering down in shifting patterns. But those who walk it claim the ground itself seems to stretch, shrink, and lead them in circles. A short walk feels endless. A long hike suddenly snaps shut in minutes. And then there are the voices, soft whispers that seem to float just beyond hearing, urging travelers to keep moving forward, always forward, never back, one family. Visiting from out of state learned the legend the hard way. They were weekend campers, 2 parents and their 3 children, who decided to take the trail for a simple afternoon hike. The first hours were uneventful. The children laughed, chasing each other between trees, while their parents pointed out birds and carved initials into a fallen log. It felt safe, even idyllic. But safety in the wilderness can be deceptive. After nearly an hour, they recognized a strange landmark. A broken tree with bark peeled back, like an open wound. The father frowned. He remembered passing it earlier, heading the opposite direction. He told himself it was a coincidence that many trees looked alike, but as they continued, the same broken trunk appeared again, unmistakable. Confusion deepened into unease. They tried turning left at the next fork, then right, then doubling back. Each time, the broken tree returned, standing in silent defiance. The children grew restless, their laughter gone, replaced by complaints of tired legs and thirst. The whispers began faintly then, so soft they could be mistaken for wind. But the youngest child, only 7, asked why the forest wanted them to go deeper. The parents tried to laugh it off, though their voices trembled. They pressed onward, believing determination would break the loop. Yet every path bent them back to the same spot. Hours stretched. The air cooled. Shadows grew longer. Their supplies, meant for a casual stroll, dwindled. By nightfall, panic set in. The family huddled together, building a small fire for warmth. The whispers grew louder in the dark, circling them, always from behind the trees. At times, the voices mimicked their own, repeating words they had spoken earlier that day. The mother swore she heard her eldest son's voice calling her name from the woods, even as he sat trembling beside her. When dawn came, relief was fleeting. The forest looked different, unfamiliar, yet the broken tree still stood before them. It was as if the trail itself had rearranged the world to trap them. Desperate, the father decided to push one final direction, straight through the undergrowth, abandoning the trail entirely. Branches clawed at them, brambles cut their skin, but they pressed forward until exhaustion forced them to rest. That was the moment they noticed the youngest child was gone. One moment he had been clutching his mother's hand, the next only empty space. They tore through the brush, calling his name, but the forest answered with whispers. No cry, no footsteps, no broken twigs to follow. Just absence, sudden and absolute. Days later, search teams found the parents and 2 remaining children wandering in shock, dehydrated and delirious. They were discovered not far from the original campsite, barely a mile away. But of the youngest, no sign ever surfaced. No footprints. No clothing. Nothing. The forest had swallowed him whole. Locals shook their heads when the story spread. Some said the family had simply panicked, lost track of time and misremembered details. But others knew better. They'd heard too many similar tales. Too many hikers who spoke of trails that doubled back on themselves, of voices urging them deeper, of loved ones gone without explanation. The legend persists because the disappearances persist. And each retelling carries the same chilling refrain. On some paths, it is not you who chooses the direction. It is the trail. And once it has chosen you, escape is never guaranteed. Messages in the dirt search and rescue teams are trained for chaos. They expect exhaustion, unpredictable weather, and heartbreaking outcomes. What they do not expect are the details that cannot be explained, details that make hardened rescuers pause, details that blur the line between accident and something else entirely. One such case began with a missing hiker reported overdue from a weekend trek. The team set out at dawn, combing the trail where he was last seen. At first, everything appeared ordinary. Scuffed dirt from boots, broken branches where someone had passed. But the further they went, the stranger the signs became. The first anomaly was a circle of sticks, carefully arranged on the ground, not scattered by chance, not fallen from above, but laid out deliberately, almost ritualistically. At the center was a single boot print, deep, pressed firmly into the soil, yet no other prints led away from it. The hiker had stepped in, and then nothing. Pushing on, the team encountered tree trunks scarred with markings, names scratched hastily into bark, some half-finished, as if carved by shaking hands. One name matched the missing hiker. Another belonged to someone who had vanished on the same trail years earlier. The rest were unknown. Whispers spread quietly among the team. They were experienced enough to know hikers sometimes leave signs when disoriented. But the randomness of the names, the overlapping timelines, they gnawed at the edges of logic. Hours later, they found footprints, dozens of them leading along the trail in a straight line. At first it was promising. Tracks meant direction, meant the hiker was moving. But halfway down the path, they simply stopped. No fade out, no scatter, just an abrupt ending as though the ground had swallowed the walker mid-step. Rescuers exchanged uneasy glances. They'd seen prints vanish in rocky terrain, in streams, but never on packed dirt. One man, seasoned from years of missions, muttered under his breath that it felt like the forest had decided the trail ended there. Still they pressed forward. Rescuers do not abandon their search. It was near sunset when they discovered the final detail. On a patch of cleared ground, someone had scratched words into the dirt with a stick. Jagged, uneven, as though written in haste, the message was chillingly simple. Don't follow the lights. No one spoke for several moments. The air felt heavier, the forest darker, as if the act of reading the words had woken something nearby. They scanned the trees, hearts pounding, but saw nothing, only shifting shadows in the fading light. When the search officially ended days later, the hiker was never found. The notes, the symbols, the footprints, the warning, all remained behind like scattered fragments of a puzzle with no solution. Among rescuers, stories like this are rarely shared outside their circles. They talk about them in low voices in the quiet of command tents or around campfires after long days. They remind each other that most disappearances have explanations, but a few resist every effort to be understood. And sometimes the evidence left behind doesn't call for answers. It calls for silence, the cabin at the end. Most trails are marked on maps, charted and measured, their features carefully recorded. But sometimes hikers stumble on things that aren't supposed to be there. One man, seasoned but solitary, recounted such an encounter, a discovery that still unsettles him years later. He had been hiking alone for 2 days, pacing himself through the rising slopes of the forest. Supplies were running low, and fatigue pressed against him with each step. When dusk settled, he searched for a place to rest, scanning for a clearing or patch of level ground. That was when he saw it, a cabin tucked between trees. It was small, weathered, yet strangely intact. No map he carried showed any sign of a structure in that area, and the nearest town lay miles away. Still, exhaustion softened suspicion. Shelter meant warmth. Shelter meant safety. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke. A fireplace still held embers, faintly glowing. Someone had been there, perhaps hours earlier. Dust covered the shelves unevenly, disturbed in patches, as though hands had moved through recently. On a small wooden table lay a notebook, its pages filled with scattered handwriting. The entries made little sense at first. Some rambled about weather, hunger, the loneliness of long nights. Others trailed off into confusion, words scratched out violently, replaced with new ones that spiraled into nonsense. But in the final pages, the message grew darker. The watchers come when the forest is quiet. Do not follow their lights. If you see the cabin twice, you are already theirs. The hiker slammed the book shut, heart pounding. Fear tangled with reason. Was this a joke? A leftover diary from some eccentric recluse? Or a warning meant for him? He backed toward the door, ears straining for movement outside. When he stepped into the cool night air, the forest seemed to lean closer. The trees pressed in, branches creaking with the weight of silence. He left quickly, refusing to glance back. All night he walked, refusing to stop, until he reached the trailhead by dawn. Later, he returned with rangers to confirm what he'd seen. They hiked the same path, retracing every step. But when they reached the place where the cabin should have been, nothing stood there. Only trees, thick and unbroken, roots, twisting in the soil as though they had always been there. No foundation, no chimney, no trace of disturbed earth, the hiker insisted. He described the ashes in the hearth, the journal on the table, the handwriting carved into his memory. The rangers exchanged skeptical looks, but there was no evidence to prove or disprove his story. Some said he imagined it, a hallucination born of hunger and exhaustion. Others whispered that the cabin is real but not fixed, appearing only to those already too far gone into the wilderness. A place that welcomes travelers in with warmth, only to vanish when they leave. And somewhere, perhaps, that notebook still waits on its table, waiting for the next person who steps through the door of a cabin that shouldn't exist, where the trails end for all the legends and mysteries that linger in the wilderness. There is another truth just as haunting. Nature itself is enough to undo even the strongest among us. Trails don't need supernatural forces to take lives. The elements, the terrain, and the mind can do it all on their own. Hypothermia, for instance, is both common and cruel. As the body loses heat, judgment falters. Victims sometimes strip off clothing in the final stages, convinced they are burning rather than freezing. Searchers have found hikers barefoot in snow, their coats folded neatly beside them. Science explains it, but knowing doesn't make the image any less eerie. Disorientation, too, is a silent predator. In dense forests, people believe they're moving straight when they're actually circling back, pulled by subtle slopes and uneven terrain. Compasses can malfunction, batteries die, and landmarks blur until the landscape feels like a living maze. Once panic sets in, even a short distance from safety can become an endless trap. And then there's the mind. Paranoia born of exhaustion, shadows shifting at the edges of vision, whispers created by wind through branches. Alone long enough, anyone can feel watched. Alone long enough, anyone can believe the wilderness has turned against them. But here is where things grow complicated, because for every disappearance explained by cold, confusion, or fear, there are others that resist reason. Tracks that end abruptly in open ground, bodies found in places already searched, campfires that burn though no one is there to tend them. These details blur the line between what can be explained and what cannot. And it is in this blur where folklore thrives. Spirits, watchers, trails that shift and hunt, stories passed down not because they are proven, but because they speak to the feeling every traveler knows deep inside, that the wilderness is bigger, older, and more powerful than us. Perhaps that is the real heart of these mysteries. Whether through exhaustion or something more, those who disappear become part of the forest itself, folded into its silence, remembered only through scattered belongings, half-finished journals, or whispers of strange lights in the trees. So when we ask where the trails end, the answer is never simple. Sometimes they end at a safe return to camp. Sometimes they end in tragedy, explained in clinical terms. And sometimes they end in questions that no one can answer, questions that keep drawing us back step after step into the deep unknown. Outro, no escape. The wilderness is vast, beautiful, and endlessly inviting. It calls to us with promises of quiet escapes, of fresh air and endless skies. But hidden in that beauty are questions we may never answer. Trails that lead forward then vanish.
Footsteps that begin but never end.
Voices that echo where no human voice should be. For centuries, people have walked into forests, mountains, and deserts seeking peace, adventure, or simply a way back to themselves. Many return with stories of wonder. Some never return at all. Their absence lingers like a shadow, a reminder that even in an age of satellites and GPS, there are places where the world slips beyond our control. Perhaps that is why these stories stay with us. They are more than mysteries. They are mirrors reflecting our deepest fears. That safety is an illusion, that silence may hide something watching. That nature is not ours to master, but a force that decides sometimes who belongs and who does not. So the next time you find yourself on a trail, listen closely. Pay attention to the silence, to the shapes of the trees, to the way the path bends when no map says it should. Because not every trail leads home. Some lead nowhere at all. And if you ever find yourself alone out there, remember this. The forest does not forget who walks into it.